Have you ever sat in a room full of people you call family and felt completely invisible? Have you ever watched your children be treated as an afterthought, while you're expected to just smile and be grateful? If you have, then you already know the quiet, burning ache that starts this story. And if you haven't, well, by the end of this, you'll understand exactly what it means to fight back with grace. Hello, my wonderful new community, and a special, heartfelt welcome to everyone finding this channel for the very first time. To those of you who are here for the very first time, thank you for clicking. I'm so glad you're here. And to my returning friends and subscribers, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for your support as I start this new creative journey. If you're here for stories about family, resilience, and the quiet strength it takes to protect the people you love, then you are in exactly the right place. If that sounds like you, please do consider hitting that like button, and subscribe so you never miss a chapter. Your comments fuel this community, so let me know what you think down below. Now, let me pull up a chair beside you and tell you a story about the Christmas I finally stopped being polite. My name is Leah. I'm a mother of 2 beautiful kids, a wife to a man who loves peace a little too much, and for 7 years, I was the quiet daughter-in-law in Diane's picture-perfect, painfully unequal family tableau. I'd mastered the art of the neutral smile, the gracious thank you for thoughtless gifts, the gentle redirect when my children's confused eyes met mine. I told myself it wasn't worth the drama, that family was complicated, that some battles just couldn't be won. But last Christmas, under the glow of my mother-in-law's impeccably decorated tree, she crossed a line. She bought stunning lavish Christmas dresses for all of my nieces. And for my daughter Emma and my son Lucas, she gave them underwear, cheap discount store underwear. And she did it with a smile that dared me to react. In that moment, as I watched my 7-year-old daughter stare at a 3-pack of cotton briefs while her cousins twirled in velvet and lace, something in me didn't just break, it crystallized. The old Leah, the one who swallowed every slight, vanished. And a new Leah was born. A Leah with a plan. This is the story of how I fought back. Not with a scream, but with strategy. Not with tears, but with quiet, unwavering precision. It's about reclaiming dignity for my children and teaching a lesson in fairness to those who'd forgotten what it meant. So get comfortable. This is The Underwear Christmas. A story of quiet revenge. I stared at the wrapped boxes under my mother-in-law's Christmas tree, counting them twice to be sure. 12 gifts for each of my sister-in-law's 3 kids. 12 perfect, gleaming packages tied with silver ribbons. For my 2 children, Emma and Lucas, I counted 4 small boxes each. My stomach twisted, but I kept my face blank. This was Diane's house after all. Her rules. Her Christmas. I'd learned years ago that showing weakness only made things worse. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine, but underneath it I could smell something bitter. My husband, James, squeezed my hand once, his palm damp with nervous sweat. He knew. He always knew when his mother was about to do something cruel. I pulled my hand away and plastered on my best smile as Diane swept into the room wearing a red velvet dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The fabric shimmered under the chandelier light, and I noticed how she positioned herself perfectly to catch everyone's attention before the gift exchange began. The gift opening began with a ceremony, as it always did at Diane's house. She positioned herself in the high-backed chair near the fireplace, a queen presiding over her court. My sister-in-law, Brenda, sat to her right with her husband, Troy, their 3 daughters arranged like dolls on the pristine white sofa. Emma and Lucas fidgeted on the floor near my feet, their excitement painfully visible. Diane started with Brenda's eldest, Madison. The first box revealed a crimson velvet dress with white lace trim, clearly expensive. Madison squealed and held it up while everyone clapped. The second gift was matching shoes. Then came jewelry. The pile beside Madison grew into a mountain of excess. My children watched, their small faces hungry with anticipation. I felt James shift uncomfortably beside me, but he said nothing. He never said anything when it came to his mother. I reached down and gently touched Emma's shoulder, trying to prepare her for what I suspected was coming. Her little hand found mine and squeezed tight. Brenda's middle daughter, Harper, went next. Another extravagant dress, this one emerald green with pearl buttons. More shoes, more toys, more everything. The youngest, Stella, received a powder blue gown that looked like something from a fairy tale. The pattern was clear now, impossible to ignore. Each of Brenda's girls got designer dresses, expensive accessories, elaborate toys. The living room buzzed with excited chatter, Diane beaming at the center of it all. When it was finally Emma's turn, my daughter crawled forward eagerly, her brown curls bouncing. She was 7 years old and still believed in the goodness of family gatherings. She reached for the first small box, wrapped in plain red paper, no ribbon. I held my breath as she tore it open. Inside was a pack of white cotton underwear. 3 pairs. From the discount store. Emma stared at them, confused. Lucas opened his box next. Boys' briefs. Also discount brands. I watched my son's face carefully, seeing the confusion bloom there too. He looked at the package, then at his cousin's piles of treasures, then back at the underwear in his hands. The room went quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then Diane laughed, light and tinkling, as if she'd just told the world's funniest joke. Growing children always need practical things, she announced to no one in particular. Brenda's girls clutched their velvet dresses, suddenly very interested in the floor. Emma looked up at me, her eyes filling with questions I couldn't answer. Not here. Not now. Lucas, who was 5 and less attuned to social cruelty, just shrugged and opened his second box. More underwear. Different colors this time. I felt heat crawling up my neck, spreading across my cheeks. My hands trembled in my lap, but I locked them together, squeezing until my knuckles went white. James cleared his throat beside me, a pathetic sound of discomfort that did nothing. Diane smiled at me directly for the first time that evening, her eyes sharp and knowing. She wanted a reaction. She always wanted a reaction. I could see it in the way she watched me, waiting for me to break, to cry, to storm out and prove I was the dramatic, unstable daughter-in-law she'd always painted me as to the rest of the family. I gave her nothing. Instead, I reached down and squeezed Emma's shoulder gently. "That's very practical, sweetheart," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "You can never have too many of these." Emma nodded slowly, trying to understand. Lucas had already moved on, distracted by a candy cane someone had given him earlier. I watched my children, their small disappointments carefully hidden behind forced smiles, and something inside me shifted. This wasn't new. This favoritism had poisoned every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering for the past 7 years. But I'd always swallowed it, convinced myself it wasn't worth the fight. Not anymore. As the gift opening continued with excessive praise for Brenda's girls and their mountains of presents, I sat perfectly still, observing. Diane kept glancing at me, clearly frustrated by my lack of reaction. But let her wonder. Let her wait. I was done playing her games on her terms. My mind was already working, calculating, planning my next move with the cold precision of someone who'd finally had enough. Dinner was the usual elaborate affair. Diane had outdone herself with a spread that belonged in a magazine. Honey-glazed ham, roasted vegetables, 3 types of potatoes, fresh rolls, and a dessert table that could feed 20 people. We gathered around the massive dining table, Brenda's family on one side, mine on the other, with Diane at the head like always. The conversation flowed around me while I pushed food around my plate. I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before. How Diane asked Madison about her piano recital but didn't ask Emma about her art project that had won a school competition. How she complimented Harper's dress but ignored that Lucas had learned to read 3 months ahead of schedule. The inequity wasn't subtle. It was calculated. Surgical. I caught James watching me nervously, probably wondering when I'd explode. But I wasn't going to explode. Not here anyway. I was planning something much more effective than an emotional outburst. I studied the family dynamics with new eyes, seeing patterns I'd been too hurt to notice before. After dinner, while the others gathered in the living room for coffee and Christmas movies, I volunteered to help clean up. Diane looked surprised but didn't object. We worked in silence for several minutes, loading the dishwasher, wrapping leftovers. The kitchen was enormous and sterile, all white marble and stainless steel. Finally Diane spoke. "I hope the children appreciated their gifts," she said carefully. I smiled without looking at her. "They did. Very practical." She set down a plate a bit too hard. "Brenda's girls are at such a precious age. They appreciate beautiful things." I nodded, scrubbing a serving dish with more force than necessary. "Emma and Lucas appreciate all kinds of things. They're very adaptable." Diane's mouth tightened. She'd wanted me to crack, to cry or yell or storm out. Instead, I was being perfectly pleasant, perfectly calm. It was driving her crazy, I could tell. Her jaw clenched every time I refused to take the bait she was dangling. I could see her frustration building with every neutral response I gave. That night, after we'd driven home in uncomfortable silence and put the kids to bed, James finally tried to talk to me. We sat in our small living room, the Christmas tree we'd decorated together blinking cheerfully in the corner. "I know what my mother did was wrong," he started. I looked at him. "Just look." He shifted on the couch. "She's always been like this with Brenda's kids. You know how she is." "I do know how she is," I said quietly. "That's the problem." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing. Now it just looked weak. "What do you want me to do?" "She's my mother. I want you to stand up for your children," I said. "I want you to tell her that what she did was cruel and humiliating." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "It's just Christmas presents. Is it really worth causing family drama?" I felt something cold settle in my stomach at his words. After 7 years of marriage, he still didn't understand what was at stake here. I stood up, suddenly too angry to sit still. "Just presents. James, your mother gave our children underwear while their cousins got designer dresses and jewelry. She did it deliberately. She wanted to hurt them, to hurt me." He looked miserable, caught between two women he couldn't please. "I'll talk to her," he said finally, but we both knew he wouldn't. Or if he did, it would be some weak, apologetic conversation that changed nothing. I walked to the window and stared out at our quiet street, decorated with colorful lights and inflatable snowmen. "Fine," I said. "Don't talk to her. But I'm done pretending this is normal. I'm done teaching our kids to accept being treated like they're worth less than their cousins." James was silent. I could feel him watching my back, probably hoping I'd turn around and tell him it was okay, that we'd just forget about it like we always did. But I didn't turn around. I stood there looking at the Christmas lights and started planning. My reflection in the window looked determined, almost fierce, and I barely recognized myself. The next morning I woke up with clarity. I'd spent the night thinking, planning, considering every angle. By the time the sun came up, I knew exactly what I needed to do. But first I needed information. I spent the day making casual phone calls. I called James's aunt, Carol, who'd always been kind to me. We chatted about Christmas, and I carefully steered the conversation toward family dynamics. "Has Diane always favored Brenda's children?" I asked, keeping my tone curious rather than accusatory. Carol sighed. "Since the day Madison was born. Brenda was always her favorite, you know. Some mothers are like that." Did know. But having it confirmed helped. Next, I called James's cousin, Nora, who lived across the country and only saw the family once a year. She was more direct. "Your mother-in-law's a piece of work," she said bluntly. "Everyone knows it. We just don't say anything because it's easier that way." That was the problem, I realized. Everyone's silence enabled Diane's cruelty. If nobody ever called her out, she'd never have to face consequences. I spent the next few days observing my children carefully. Emma had grown quiet, playing with her dolls but without her usual enthusiasm. Lucas seemed fine on the surface, but I caught him staring at the small pile of practical gifts Diane had given him with a confused expression. One evening I sat down with both of them. "Can I ask you something?" I said gently. Emma looked up from her coloring book. Lucas abandoned his toy cars. Did it make you sad that Grandma Diane gave Madison and Harper and Stella such fancy presents? Emma's bottom lip trembled. A little bit. Are we not special like them? My heart cracked. You are incredibly special. More special than you know. Lucas frowned. Then why didn't we get dresses and toys? I chose my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups make unfair choices. But that doesn't mean you're not important. It means they're wrong. Emma processed this for a moment. Can grown-ups be wrong? She asked. Yes, I said firmly. They absolutely can. I pulled both my children close, feeling their small bodies relax against mine, and promised myself I would fix this. That night, after the kids were asleep, I pulled out my laptop and started researching. I looked up child psychology articles about favoritism. I read about the long-term effects of being treated as less than within a family structure. Every article confirmed what I already knew in my gut. This pattern was damaging my children. It wasn't about the presents themselves. It was about the message. The message that they weren't as valuable as their cousins. That they didn't deserve the same love and attention. I thought about my own childhood, about my mother who'd always made me feel seen and heard and important. I thought about the kind of grandmother I wanted Emma and Lucas to have. Diane wasn't that grandmother. She would never be that grandmother. But I could control how much access she had to hurt them. I could control the narrative. And I would start at the next family gathering, which was New Year's Eve. I had 1 week to prepare, and I intended to use every minute of it. I made lists, planned strategies, thought through every possible scenario and how I would respond. I spent the week between Christmas and New Year's preparing. I bought Emma and Lucas beautiful new outfits. Not expensive but carefully chosen to make them feel special. I practiced conversations in my head, planning responses to likely scenarios. Most importantly, I talked to James again. This time I didn't ask for his opinion. Here's what's going to happen, I told him on the morning of New Year's Eve. We're going to your mother's party. I'm going to be perfectly polite and perfectly friendly. But I'm also going to make sure our children are celebrated and valued. And you're going to support me. He looked nervous. What are you planning to do? Nothing dramatic, I assured him. Just strategic. He didn't look convinced, but he nodded anyway. Maybe he was finally starting to understand that his silence had consequences. Or maybe he was just tired of the tension. Either way, I didn't particularly care anymore. I had a plan and I was going to execute it whether he helped me or not. I'd spent years waiting for him to protect our children. Now I would do it myself. We arrived at Diane's house at 6 o'clock sharp. The place was decorated even more extravagantly than it had been for Christmas, with gold and silver balloons and a champagne fountain in the dining room. Brenda's family was already there, the girls in matching silver dresses, looking like a coordinated dance troupe. Emma and Lucas held my hands tightly, dressed in the outfits I'd chosen. Emma in a navy velvet dress with white tights, Lucas in a crisp button-down and tiny blazer. When Diane saw us, her eyes narrowed slightly at my children's appearance, but she smiled. "How lovely you all look," she said, her tone suggesting the opposite. Smiled back. "Thank you." Emma picked out her dress herself. "She has excellent taste." I saw Diane's jaw tighten. She wasn't used to me pushing back, even gently. "How nice," she said tightly, then turned to greet other arriving guests. I watched her walk away, already uncomfortable with the evening's direction. But I wanted her off balance. I wanted her to wonder what I was planning. As the evening progressed, I implemented my plan. Every time Diane praised Brenda's daughters, I casually mentioned something wonderful about Emma or Lucas. When Diane complimented Madison's piano playing, I said, "Emma's artwork won the school competition last month. We're so proud." When she admired Harper's report card, I added, "Lucas is reading at a 3rd grade level already. His teacher says she's never seen a kindergartner advance so quickly." I kept my tone light and friendly, never confrontational. But I made sure everyone in the room heard me. I saw Carol, James's aunt, nodding approvingly. I saw other relatives starting to pay attention to my children in ways they hadn't before. Most importantly, I saw Diane's frustration growing. She'd built her perfect little hierarchy, and I was disrupting it with nothing more than truth and persistence. By 8 o'clock, several people had approached Emma to ask about her art. 2 relatives had engaged Lucas in conversation about his reading. The shift in attention was subtle but unmistakable. I could see Diane's control slipping, and it felt like justice. Around 9 o'clock, Diane announced a family game. "We're going to play Christmas trivia," she declared, clapping her hands. "Everyone gets into teams." I knew immediately what she was doing. Brenda's older daughters would dominate the trivia, getting praised and rewarded while Emma and Lucas struggled to keep up. But I was ready. "What a fun idea," I said brightly. "How about we do teams with mixed ages? That way the younger children can learn from the older ones." I saw Diane hesitate. She couldn't object without looking petty. "That's actually a good idea," Troy said, always oblivious to undercurrents. "More fair that way." Diane forced a smile. "Of course. Mixed ages it is." I made sure Emma and Lucas ended up on different teams with supportive relatives. Carol took Emma under her wing. Nora, who'd flown in for New Year's, partnered with Lucas. The game began, and I watched carefully, ready to intervene if anyone tried to make my children feel stupid or incompetent. But I didn't need to. Carol and Nora were natural advocates, encouraging my kids with every question. As I'd hoped, the mixed-age teams leveled the playing field. Emma, despite being younger than her cousins, answered several questions correctly with Carol's encouragement. Lucas, with Nora's patient help, contributed to his team's score. When Emma's team won, she beamed with pride. I watched Diane's face carefully. She looked like she'd bitten into something sour. "Well done, everyone," she said stiffly, barely glancing at Emma. But it didn't matter. Other relatives were congratulating Emma, high-fiving her, making her feel like she'd accomplished something real. Madison, Harper, and Stella looked confused. They weren't used to sharing attention. I felt a small, mean satisfaction at that, which I immediately felt guilty about. But only a little guilt. These children weren't my enemy. Their grandmother's favoritism was. Around 10 o'clock, Diane suggested the children perform a talent show for the adults. Here came, I thought, another setup for her golden grandchildren to shine. But I'd prepared for this too. My children had been practicing something special all week. But I'd prepared for this too. Over the past week, I'd worked with Emma and Lucas on a simple but charming performance. A short skit about 2 siblings going on an adventure. They'd practiced it every evening, and while it wasn't perfect, it was genuine and sweet. When Diane called for volunteers, Madison immediately jumped up to play a piano piece. She performed beautifully, as always, to enthusiastic applause. Harper and Stella did a synchronized dance routine they'd clearly been working on for weeks. More applause. Diane beamed like she'd personally taught them everything they knew. Then I gently nudged Emma forward. "Emma and Lucas prepared something special," I announced. They performed their skit in our little corner of the living room. Emma's voice carried clearly. Lucas remembered all his lines, and their natural chemistry as siblings made the piece touching. When they finished, the room erupted in genuine applause, not the polite clapping Diane's favorites usually received. I felt tears prick my eyes watching my children take their bow, their faces glowing with pride and accomplishment. Several relatives stood up, moved by the authenticity of what they'd just seen. Carol hugged Emma tightly. Nora high-fived Lucas. Even Troy looked impressed. "That was amazing," he said to James. "Where'd they learn to do that?" James, to his credit, smiled proudly. "They worked on it all week. Leah helped them." I saw something shift in him then, something I'd been waiting years to see. Pride in his own children that wasn't shadowed by his mother's disapproval. Diane sat in her chair, visibly struggling to maintain her composure. She couldn't criticize the performance without looking like a monster. But she couldn't genuinely praise it either. Finally she managed, "How creative," in a tone that suggested anything but admiration. I smiled at her, sweet as honey. They're full of surprises, these two. As midnight approached, I felt the balance of the evening tipping in a new direction. My children had been seen. Truly seen by people other than me. And once people started seeing them, really seeing them, it would be harder for Diane to keep them invisible. The power was shifting, slowly but surely. At 11:30, while everyone was preparing for the midnight countdown, I found James alone in the kitchen. He was pouring champagne into plastic flutes for the adults. "Thank you," I said quietly. He looked at me confused. "For what?" "For not interfering tonight. For letting me handle this my way." He set down the champagne bottle. "I should have handled it myself. Years ago." I studied his face, looking for sincerity. "Are you really going to stand up to her?" He took a deep breath. "I watched our kids tonight. I saw how happy they were when people actually paid attention to them. Not out of obligation, but because they were genuinely impressive." His voice cracked slightly. "I've been a coward. I let my mother make them feel small because it was easier than confronting her." I touched his arm gently. "It's not too late to change." He nodded, looking more resolved than I'd seen him in years. "After tonight, things are going to be different. I promise you that." I wanted to believe him. Part of me did believe him. But I'd learned to trust actions, not words. When midnight struck and everyone cheered, I held Emma and Lucas close, watching the fireworks someone had set off in the backyard. In that moment, surrounded by the noise and celebration, I felt something settle in my chest. Peace maybe. Or vindication. We left Diane's house around 12:30, Emma and Lucas sleepy but happy in the back seat. As we drove home through empty streets, James reached over and took my hand. "I'm sorry it took me so long," he said. I squeezed his hand back. "Just don't let it happen again." He promised he wouldn't. I wanted to believe him. The next morning we woke to a group text from Diane, sent to the entire family. "I've been doing some thinking about the holidays," it read. "Perhaps we should establish some new traditions that are more inclusive for all the grandchildren." I showed the text to James. He looked stunned. Did we actually get through to her? I wasn't sure, but I was willing to wait and see what happened next. Words were easy. Follow-through would be the real test. I wasn't naive enough to think one evening had completely transformed Diane. Leopards don't change their spots overnight. But something had shifted. Maybe it was seeing other family members respond positively to Emma and Lucas. Maybe it was the realization that her favoritism was becoming noticeable enough that people were starting to talk. Or maybe, just maybe, she'd had a small moment of self-reflection. Whatever the reason, her text suggested a willingness to change, even if that change was motivated by self-preservation rather than genuine remorse. Over the next few weeks I watched carefully. Diane made an effort, inviting Emma and Lucas over for activities without their cousins present. She asked about their interests. She sent small gifts that weren't designer dresses but weren't underwear either. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and I made sure she knew I was watching. Every interaction was an opportunity to reinforce the new standard I'd set. I documented everything too, keeping a mental record of how she treated my children. Trust would have to be earned slowly, and I wasn't ready to give it freely. One afternoon in January, Diane invited me to lunch. Just the two of us. I almost declined, but curiosity got the better of me. We met at a small cafe downtown, sitting across from each other with awkward cups of coffee between us. "I want to apologize," she said finally, the words clearly difficult for her. "For Christmas. For making Emma and Lucas feel less important than their cousins." I waited, saying nothing. She continued, uncomfortable under my steady gaze. I didn't realize how obvious I was. Or how much it hurt them. "It did hurt them," I said quietly. "It hurt me too." She nodded. "Brenda is my daughter. I suppose I always favored her children without thinking about what that meant for yours." I leaned forward. Here's what I need you to understand. Emma and Lucas are just as much your grandchildren as Madison, Harper, and Stella. They deserve equal love and attention. Not because I'm demanding it, but because it's right. I watched her face carefully, looking for signs of genuine understanding. What I saw was complicated. Shame, defensiveness, and maybe a hint of real regret. Diane looked out the cafe window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. My mother favored my older sister, she said quietly. I spent my whole childhood feeling second best. You'd think I'd know better than to repeat that pattern. I felt an unexpected surge of sympathy. Hurt people, as the saying goes. You can break the cycle, I told her. But you have to choose to do it. Consciously. Every day. She met my eyes. I'll try. It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't the dramatic, tearful reconciliation you see in movies. But it was honest, and that mattered. As we left the cafe, I felt something I hadn't felt in years when it came to Diane. Hope. Not blind hope, but cautious optimism that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. That evening, when I told James about the lunch, he looked relieved. Does this mean we can have normal family gatherings now? I laughed. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll see how she follows through. I'd learned not to trust words alone. Actions would tell me everything I needed to know. But for the first time in 7 years, I felt like maybe our children could have a real relationship with their grandmother. By the time Emma's 8th birthday rolled around in February, the family dynamic had noticeably shifted. Diane threw a party at her house, inviting all the grandchildren. But this time, Emma was at the center of it. Diane had ordered a custom cake featuring Emma's favorite book characters. She'd organized games Emma loved. And when it came time for presents, Emma received a beautiful art set, professional quality, the kind of gift that showed real thought and attention. As I watched my daughter blow out her candles, surrounded by cousins who now treated her as an equal rather than an afterthought, I felt tears prick my eyes. James wrapped his arm around my waist. You did this, he whispered. I shook my head. We did this. By refusing to accept less than what our children deserve. Later after the party, as we drove home with Emma chattering excitedly about her gifts and Lucas asking when his birthday would come, I realized something important. I hadn't won by being cruel or vindictive. I'd won by being persistent, strategic, and unwilling to let my children's worth be diminished. Sometimes the quietest revolutions are the most powerful ones. And as I looked at my husband driving, my children laughing in the back seat, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together as a family that finally understood its own value. That night, as I tucked Emma into bed, she hugged me tight and whispered, "Today was the best birthday ever, Mommy." And I knew, absolutely knew, that every moment of the fight had been worth it.